Hello everyone, it's Sim Manocha and Dema Tamanawala here from CRELIBRARY. We're very excited to be at the office of Nyx Capital Corp and joined by one of the principals and their chief investment officer, Max Vo. Max and I used to work together, and what I know about Max is that he has a lot of experience on the institutional side, the brokerage side, and now the private equity side. Can you tell us a little bit about your story and your background?
Okay, great. Thanks, Emma. Thanks, Sim, for having me here. It's a pleasure to join your show to talk a little bit about my career. I guess would you like me to start?
Just right at the beginning.
Right at the beginning.
Right at the beginning.
Yeah.
Where were you born, Max?
Well, why don't I start at sort of the university level and how it is that I became interested in commercial real estate.
Good idea.
So I'm actually from Vancouver. I grew up in a suburb of Vancouver, but decided that I didn't want to stay in Vancouver to go to school. Wanted to get out of the town. And I started researching business schools, and it actually came down to two. It was either Queen's or Western that I was going to go to. Got accepted into both, but ultimately decided that I wanted to go to Queen's, contrary to my two young friends here.
We forgive you. It's okay.
And after going through Queen's, I don't know how it was like at Western, but typically like a third of the class goes into accounting, a third of the class goes into marketing, and the rest, some go into iBanking, some go into other consulting jobs. And real estate, back when I was in school, really wasn't a career choice. Very few people from business school were going straight into real estate.
Yeah.
But I was fortunate to have a classmate 1 year younger than myself who asked me when I was in my fourth year, what do you want to do when you graduate? And I started talking about my marketing or consulting options. And I asked her what she was thinking about. And she said, oh, my father's in commercial real estate. And I'm thinking about going into that field once I graduate as well. And so that kind of piqued my interest. And little by little, I started researching about the industry. And eventually it led to me finding a Queen's alumnus who was working at a brokerage firm called Smith & Company, run by Paul Smith, who's also a Western alumnus. And ultimately I was not successful at securing a job with Smith & Company, but I did get a job at J.J. Barneke. And so that's how I started my real estate career.
Wow.
Interesting. So when you sort of made that transition from student to professional, young professional, working at a broker shop, what was the kind of role that you did at, that you participated in at Barneke? And was that of interest to you, or how did you feel yourself fitting in at a brokerage shop?
I guess rightly or wrongly, I decided to join Brokerage because of the potential. Whatever you put in is what you're going to get. It's a very entrepreneurial field. And coming out of school, I didn't see myself immediately working in a corporate environment and trying to climb the ladder. I liked the ability to be able to work hard and make potentially an unlimited salary if things went my way. And brokerage also, I was really interested in real estate at the time. Yeah. And I felt as if it was a really good place to just learn about real estate as well. So in some sense, it was a great way as a young person coming straight out of school to get an additional education coming out of school. Yeah. So into Barneke, my role was, I started off as I still remember to this day, on my card, if you were not licensed, you would have your name, and some of us even put our university degrees, and right under it said sales trainee.
Yeah. I had, so we talk about this a little later, but I got hired actually by Andrew, who you know, Andrew Barneke. But my initial title when I started unlicensed was intern analyst. Like, oh great, that's what I want to tell my friends.
Yeah,
right?
I was an associate, so they at least, didn't put the word sales in mine, although off the record, it was a little bit of a sales.
Yeah, coming out of school, the Queen's School of Business, some of my friends were now consultants, and some of them were going the accounting route, and I was a sales trainee,
Nice.
which was great. However, I did get a couple of weird looks when I was on tours with other senior agents.
Right.
They said, "Why couldn't they just put something else in your car?"
Yeah. Yeah. So, so how did you, in that position, were you kind of hitting the phones? Were you you're just learning the ropes? What was your day to day?
So I was at Barnaky in total about 3 years.
Okay.
So the first year and a half, I was just assisting other senior agents trying to figure out where I wanted to be in the real estate business.
Yeah.
I had to decide whether I liked office more or industrial more.
Right.
And at that time, I was a bit of a gopher, helping out a number of different agents, seeing what I could help out with.
Mm-hmm.
And my job was to hit the phones. And just for some reason, I started to gravitate more towards industrial than I did on the office side.
Yeah.
As well, I was placed in the West End. And as you know, the West End of the GTA is really where it's the heart of the industrial landscape of Canada. And we're the 4th largest industrial node in North America.
Okay.
So that's why naturally I just started to work on more and more industrial projects, taking on leasing mandates, taking on some direct tenant representation mandates.
Right.
And for the first year and a half, that's what I did. I hit the phones, I had some listings, I did showings for other senior agents, and got licensed. So that's what I did for the first half.
And then after that, what was your transition from being in a brokerage capacity, hitting the phones, into working for a larger institution? What ended up happening there?
Yeah, so like I said, the first half of my time at Barnaky was in the more leasing side and tenant representation side.
Yeah.
But after a year and a half, I decided I wanted to learn more about the investment side. And I was very fortunate that the investments team at Barnaky, so I made the move from Mississauga to the downtown office and worked for Andrew Barnaky's group at the time,
Right.
along with Nick Yonovsky, who's now over at Davidson Young. And I just helped their team as an analyst. So I had to learn Argus. It's not like nowadays where there's training courses you can go on. They
Right.
threw me a book and gave me the software package and said, go figure it out. Which was great. It forced me to learn really quickly.
Yeah.
And I helped them underwrite and helped them create the CIMs and assisted the senior agents wherever I could. And after a year and a half of working with the investments team, which was really great, it was a great experience. I was 3 years in, and how I made the transition was it wasn't on purpose. Frankly, I started receiving calls from headhunters, and I remember to this day that I got 2 calls. One looking for a real estate analyst position over at GWO Realty Advisors, and I also got an offer from Cadillac Fairview at the time. And after weighing the options, and I then confided in my sort of boss at the time. His name was Jim Murray, out in the GTA West office of JJ Barnaky.
Sounds like a familiar name.
Yeah,
Jim Murray.
so Jim, he's a force of nature, and he taught me a lot over the years. And I asked Jim, here are the 2 options. Unfortunately, I will be leaving Barnaky, but here are my 2 options. And Jim said that GWL was growing by leaps and bounds, which it was at the time, and it would be great to jump on that train. And the West office was headed by a gentleman named Mike Snell, and Jim said he would be one of the best people in real estate to work for. And with that recommendation, encouragement, I made the move from brokerage over to institutional and advisory real estate.
Wow. And then, sorry, I'm just hopping off script here. When does Sim mentioned that at one point you moved down to Mexico? When does that come into play?
So
I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but.
Yeah, so that comes into play. It actually goes back to my university days, believe it or not. So in third year university at Queen's, most of us were encouraged to not actually stay in Kingston, which as great as it has really cold winters.
Yeah.
So I made the decision in my third year to go study business in Mexico.
Oh, okay.
I had learned a little bit of Spanish at Queen's, but I went down to Mexico and studied at the Tecnológico de Monterrey, just south of Mexico City. And I learned Spanish there. So I didn't know if or when I would ever use my
Yeah.
Spanish again.
Yeah.
I did happen to marry a Mexican girl though, which
Yeah.
helped.
Did you meet her down there?
I met her in Mexico. Yeah,
She's
I met
amazing,
My,
so-
my wife in Mexico. So I'm in the real estate business, but I happened to, because I was in university and decided to do my exchange program there, learn Spanish, and hoped that one day I would have an opportunity to combine the two. And that opportunity came about in around 2015 when my partner at the time had secured a fund from AIMCO, their large pension plan out of Alberta,
Yeah.
and they had committed to us about $150 million to execute a retail strategy in Mexico. And that's where it all sort of came together. I was already at the time working as a portfolio manager and asset manager, so I had experience on the portfolio and asset management side. And now I had an opportunity to, from Canada, execute a retail strategy in Mexico.
Wow.
So that's how it all sort of comes together. And although I was not there very long, I was there for about a year,
Yeah.
but it was a lot of fun being able to take the portfolio at the time. When I joined, we had only invested about $15 million Canadian into 2 assets. And by the time we had left, we had committed $130 million. We successfully purchased a portfolio of enclosed malls and retail assets, as well as had a number of development projects going on. Unfortunately, I decided to come back to Canada after just a short year there, but it was a great experience.
Yeah. What was that like going down to Mexico? Like how did you end up purchasing some of those buildings? You know, what were the tenants like, and that kind of, what was your due diligence like?
Yeah, so that's a great thing about real estate, is that it doesn't really matter what market you go to. If you know the fundamentals of real estate, I feel as if they can be applied to any market, anywhere in the world. Of course, there's local considerations to take care of. There's different laws that you need to consider. For example, in Mexico, it's civil law versus in Canada, we're common law. Tenants' rights are way different in Mexico than they are here. They're much more in favor of the tenant in Mexico. It's very hard to get rid of a tenant. And these are things you just learn along the way. Construction, development, sometimes here things are more straightforward, more transparent. In Mexico, it's not always black or white. There's a lot of gray. And you learn to navigate the different markets and try to be flexible, but work for the best interests of your shareholders. In this case, it was AIMCO. And I feel as if the skills that I had definitely helped me to underwrite the properties there and find opportunities, but there's a lot of learning that you have to go through when you work in a new country, new culture, new language. And I would say that working in a different market, what I learned, I think what I really realized is the importance of good partners. Because you can't do everything on your own, and especially when you go to a new market with new laws and new language, you have to have good boots on the ground. So that's what we did. A big part of our job, the company I was working for was called Barnhart Asset Management, was simply selecting and vetting the best partners that we could to execute the strategy. So as important as a good property, finding a good property, as important as that aspect of the real estate investment as a portfolio manager is, I would say that more than 50% of the success of a project comes down to choosing and working with the right partner.
And are you talking about like investment partner, development partner, like asset management partner, like what type of?
So the boots on the ground were people who were sourcing the deals for us, and they would be doing the accounting, the property management, the leasing. So we were really acting as portfolio manager, executing the investment strategy on behalf of the pension fund. However, we weren't doing the day-to-day. Right? We were overseeing the day-to-day, but you need people on the ground doing the leasing, fixing the asphalt, fixing the roofs. We couldn't do that from Canada. Although we were in Mexico usually about 10 days out of every month, it's impossible to do the day-to-day without having the right partners on the ground executing. Yeah.
And in terms of the other aspect of it, which is vetting the project itself, how do you go about as an investment officer at your current firm vetting projects and determining which projects are right for your company versus how did you go about vetting the right investment opportunities down when you were in Mexico, let's say, or when you were at other institutions?
Yeah, that's a great question, Sim. I actually steal a framework that originally came from my friends over at PSP Investments, a large pension plan located in Montreal. Whenever they look at investing with other partners, they shared with me this acronym called Vegas.
Right.
And at first I thought it was kind of corny, but it's stuck with me ever since, and I use it whenever I look at any potential investment opportunity. So Vegas, VEGAS. So the V is value. When I look at an opportunity and I look at the value, what I'm really sort of focusing on is, on a risk-adjusted basis, is the return I'm getting fair for what I'm looking at? So if it's riskier, the return needs to be higher. If it's less risky, the return is lower. But based on a risk-adjusted basis, am I getting a good return on the investment that I'm taking on? E, expertise. I work now in a private equity company, and we get lots of different opportunities that come across our desk. And I'm not just solely investing in industrial, retail, office, apartments. I look at all opportunities and I look at everything that makes sense. However, I always pull it back and say, do we actually have the expertise, either in-house or can I find it outside, to execute the business plan? Even if there's a really, really good real estate or business opportunity, you need to pull it back and be humble and make sure that you can execute on the vision. G, governance. So that talks a little bit about what happens when a project doesn't go well. How is the reporting? How is the accounting? What are the shareholder rights? And this is especially important when we take on partners. So it's always nice at the beginning of a relationship. Everybody's friendly, everything's great, everything's good. But once the rubber hits the road and there are some real decisions that have to be made, and people come together and start to, if there is some friction, how is it governed? Is the reporting done correctly? Do we have the right rights? Can we replace the asset manager? Can we replace the general partner? Governance is very important, I think, in any real estate investment transaction. A, alignment. And this is something that I didn't really get a good appreciation for until I started working in the private equity world. So before, when I worked at GWL and when I worked at Morguard, I worked on behalf of pension plans. And it's a totally different world than working in the private equity side. Because in the pension fund world, in Canada, many of these pension plans are non-taxable. They're something called Section 149 companies.
Right.
So when they look at their returns, they're not too concerned about leveraging, and they're not always too concerned about the tax consequences of their investment decisions because they're non-taxable, which is a great advantage that the pension funds and many of the insurance companies have. However, on the private equity side, every dollar counts, and we typically try to maximize investor IRR. And in order to do that, we need to take into account cash flow, we need to take into account a debt, use of leverage, right? So when it comes to alignment, especially on the private equity side, so sorry, I made a little bit of a segue there, there's typically two things that I look for. A, does the principal or the principals of the investing firm have their own cash in the deal? Do they have something to lose if the project goes down? Are they front-loading their fees with, say, acquisition costs and development costs and other? Are they increasing the value of the project even before it starts?
Right.
Front-loaded fees is kind of what I call it, versus taking the profits at the back end, right? By taking them at the back end, you are saying to your investors, look, when you make money, I make money, right? So alignment, I think, is a very important part of any partnership that you get into and any real estate transaction going forward. We have to face the facts. Real estate is an expensive business and it's very capital intensive. Because of that, we typically need partners to successfully execute our deals. And whether it's on our side, looking at partners, or bringing on pension plans who are then looking at us, is there the correct alignment? So that's the A. And then finally, the S. S stands for scale. Simply put, is it the right size of project that we should be doing at this time? For example, at Nyx right now, even though we're a small private equity firm, we typically like to put out anywhere from say 5 up to call it $20 million of equity into any given deal. And if I see a project, I may have a friend who brings me an excellent project, maybe 50% IRR, but the total investment he needs from me is $200,000.
Right.
It's a good opportunity, but it may not be the right scale. On the flip side, I have a friend over at CPPIB, and I recently brought her a project. It was a $140 million investment, and we needed equity of, call it $60 million. It was a redevelopment. And she said, Max, if it's not at least $500 million in equity, we just don't have the manpower to work on it.
Right.
Right? So scale is the last thing. There could be really good deals out there, but are they too big for you? Are they too small for you? Or are they like the Goldilocks and the Three Bears? Just right. So you got to take into account the resources you have, both financial and human capital, and the project that you're working on, is it the right scale for you at any point in time? That's Vegas.
Yeah.
Very interesting. I just want to tap in a little bit more on that.
Better than the city.
Yeah. I want to tap in a little bit more on that. The two things you mentioned there that I thought were really interesting, the most interesting one being that alignment and how companies in the private equity sphere do it. So I know a few of the ways that private equity groups try to sort of show that back-end incentive. But if you don't mind explaining what you've seen in the marketplace to show that alignment, different structures, different ways that companies are organizing themselves to align with their investors.
Yeah, I typically see like two most common ways of, especially private equity investors, promoting the correct alignment. First is their own skin in the game, as I mentioned, so co-investing with their investors. I've reached out to and have been sought out by a number of partners, and I've seen all types of arrangements. But typically, whenever I see a potential partner who does not want to put any of their own money into the game, it's a cause of concern.
Yeah.
It could be a great project, but at the end of the day, we like to see people aligned with us. And on the flip side, on our own projects, Nyx typically puts in 15% up to 50% of the equity ourselves. And then we go out and seek other partners. And because we put in a substantial amount of the investment ourselves as principals in the company, our investors feel as if they're investing not just with us, but alongside us. And they know that we're putting our money where our mouth is.
Yeah.
Right? So real hard cash investment to the deal. That's very important. And then on the back end, it's a way that we promote proper alignment is really through fees. Right? Are we making most of our money upfront through management fees or acquisition fee, or really making our money on the back end or incentivized to execute on the business plan? And the way that most private equity companies, even you see this in venture capital as well, is that there will be a hurdle, and it could be anywhere from 6%, sometimes it creeps up as high as 12 to 14%. We call that a preferred return. So on an IRR basis annually, you first have to hit the hurdle. Let's just pick 8% for argument's sake. The first 8% per year on an IRR basis goes 100% to the investors. And then anything over the 8% then gets split between the investors and the management company or the general partner. So the structures that I typically see is that over a hurdle of 8, you'll see a split depending on the project, depending on the riskiness, usually something around 80-20. So after 8%, 80% goes to the investors, and then 20% of anything over that 8% starts going to the general partner and the developers. And then sometimes you also see that number ratchet up. So say instead of 8, you hit 10, 12, 15, 18. Sometimes I've seen projects where anything over, say it's a development project and you blow the lights out, right? I've seen it where anything over 15 or sometimes even 20%, you'll start splitting profits 50-50, right? So there are many ways to skin the cat, but in general, I guess the real moral of the story is as an investor investing into a deal, I want to make sure that that manager is incentivized to maximize IRR
Yeah.
so that if I do well, he does well, right?
Yeah.
So
we just had we spoke with Marcus Gillum the other day in talking about general contracting, and he was saying alignment is a huge thing for him, and that's a big component by making sure that all of his sub trades are equally motivated by the success of the project as a whole.
Yeah.
That's something that's helped push his group even further and making sure everybody's on the same page. So interesting. I wanted to ask you too, so because we kind of glossed over this, but you've been an asset manager for GWL, Morguard, Crest Point, sorry.
yeah.
And now on a lot of those publicly funded, now more on the private side. What's the biggest difference there?
The biggest difference, I think it's twofold. Number one is scale.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? So when I worked for the larger pension plans at GWL, I was managing about $500 million of assets across the GTA.
Right.
Moving to Morguard, I managed about $1 billion of industrial assets across Canada. And then over at Crest Point, I was managing just under $2 billion of commercial real estate as both portfolio and asset manager.
Yeah.
So moving over to the private equity side now, it's quite different. My portfolio, I only have 7 active projects right now, and the developed and enterprise value, call it $300 million. So it's a lot less in terms of scale.
Right.
However, I have a much smaller team,
Right.
and we have our own dollars invested,
Yeah.
but the returns are very different. I would say it's harder to get really high returns at such a big scale when you're working for a company that has, say, $5 or $10 billion of assets under management.
Right.
You can execute the program, but it's hard to get returns over 15%. Typically, the returns when I was working at the pension fund advisory side, usually high single digits was considered a very good return, which is a good return for a pension plan. But here on the private equity side, we deploy leverage and we take on a little bit more risk in the deals that we do. And in many cases involves development. So for our investors on the private equity side, we typically pass on projects that don't return at least 15% per year on an IRR basis. And in many cases, our projects return well in excess of 20% per year. So when we go back to the formula of how we incentivize and the right alignment, we, at Nyx, depending on the project, we typically have a hurdle. And over that hurdle, we make more as a company if we exceed it. And when we're hitting numbers that are in the high teens and into the 20s, it means that everybody's doing well. And we're all properly aligned. Incentivized.
Sort of going back to that Vegas model, looking for value and looking to get those IRRs that you need now at Nyx to get your private equity investors excited about a deal. How do you actually look at, let's say, a site or any given property and determine if it does meet that value proposition for you? What's your investment process on that?
So for us, we're very fortunate to play in this unique space where we're not the huge pension plans that need the scale, need to put out the big dollars before we can accept a project. And we're also not so small that we can't take on sizable deals. So we play in this really neat sweet spot of looking at deals that are a little bit too big for the private investors, but in many cases they're too small for the institutional investors. Right, and we're able to act decisively and quickly as a family-run and partner-owned firm. How do we do it? I would say in order to hit returns of in excess of 15% per year, it's quite niche. For the most part, we're not buying income-producing real estate. If I were to buy income-producing real estate, I could project returns of anywhere from 5 to 8%. But in order to make double that, I typically need to take on A, development risk. 2, I would have to take on assets that have a higher and better use, so redevelopment.
Value add or redevelopment, yeah.
Right? Or 3, take on properties that have leasing challenges, right? So that's what we look for. We look for properties where we can roll up our sleeves and add value either through leasing, increasing NOI, through redevelopment or through entitlement.
Can you talk about some of those examples, just of maybe like a huge one where you were able to do an absolute turnaround of a property?
Yeah. Well, I'll give you a really interesting example where we were on the process. That was our business plan to do the turnaround. And then the market just overtook what we were trying to do. So we purchased, approximately 2 years ago, we purchased 30 acres of land up in Brampton. And the land was zoned industrial. And at the time, it was only $575 an acre. So we purchased the whole project for $17 million, of which we financed $11 million. We had about $6 million of equity in. Our plan at the time was to rezone the property from industrial to retail, because we thought that in Brampton, at the location it was at, it was a corner property, and it made sense for it to be retail versus industrial.
Right.
And it was a good opportunity, but it was also very big. As having managed retail before, 30 acres is hard to fill. You can build a lot of real estate on 30 acres of land.
Yeah.
That being said, we approached a large warehouse retailer who is very well known, and they agreed that they would take down half of our property. And that really helped, because with now what we would call as a shadow anchor, with huge draw, international recognition, we knew that with our remaining 15 acres, we could build something fairly special.
Right.
And so on our remaining 15 acres, we started to put in place a plan to bring in a grocery store and start to fill out the retail pads on that site. We had to get it rezoned though, because our site was industrial. And in order to execute this business plan, we had to go through the entitlement process. And that means lobbying the city councillors, working with planning staff to try to convince them that the highest and best use of this site was not industrial, but really retail.
Yeah.
And off we went with this plan. And as we walked in, 12 months, 13 months, 18 months in the plan, all was going well, moving things along. We actually even got approval from the planning committee at the city to rezone the property to allow for the retail use.
Okay.
We even got it passed at council. We made some great inroads, and our business plan was to build out 150,000 square feet for the retail warehouser, and then we were going to build out another 150 to 175,000 feet on our site.
Yeah.
It would have been a 6 to 7 year project. IRR would have been in the low 20s. Everything was moving along.
Yeah.
And then we got sideswiped. Industrial has been on fire in the GTA. And being an industrial specialist, I knew even at the time we bought the property that it was a good price. And I said, even if this doesn't work out, our plan B is that we could simply build an industrial park here, and it's going to do just fine.
Right. What are vacancy rates right now in industrial, and let's say the GTA
zero.
West? Exactly.
Effectively zero, right? It's unbelievable. The GTA is wildly underserved. There's not enough industrial space right now. It's been underdeveloped, and to the detriment of retail, I would say that the industrial side, whether it be logistics, warehousing, manufacturing, there's huge and insatiable demand from both investors of industrial real estate as well as users of industrial real estate.
Yeah.
And us having a 30-acre development parcel in the middle of Brampton with 20 acres allowing for outside storage, it became very, very valuable to industrial users. So we were presented with an offer for $32 million to walk away from our deal. And 18 months in, just as a recap, we bought this for 17,
Right.
6 million.
6 of actual cash. Correct?
6 of actual equity, and we were given a firm deal for 32. Could we have held out for more? I think we could have. And I spoke with the partners at the firm, and I said, industrial is doing so well. We've got this great zoning. So even though we've put in all this work and effort to build this business plan, to build a retail property here, it may actually have changed. Market conditions may have changed so that the highest and best use is actually back to industrial.
Yeah.
And could we have held out for more, developed the land, cut up the parcels and sold them off and made more money? Yes, we could have. But making that type of return after 18 months as a small company, private equity company, it's never a bad thing to take some chips off the table, especially when your investor sees such a good return after such a short period of time. So we took the money off the table, we closed in January, and we've reloaded with new projects.
Wow.
That's amazing. Yeah, $6 million into a deal, you get your 6 back. You put in some soft costs to take it through the entitlement
Like we
process.
could have done well, to answer
partially.
your question. We could have done well with our original business plan of retail,
Yeah.
but at the end of the day, we would have made a little bit more profit,
Right.
but we would have taken on the risk of actually developing over the 6 years, making sure that all the leasing plans fall into place,
Right.
the TIs and commissions that you have to spend to get there, and then ultimately exiting the project
Yeah.
at the end of the 6 years versus cash in hand right
It's
now.
already there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now
and
you
go
have
do
$20
it.
million of equity you can work with.
So,
right?
it was accidental. That wasn't our business plan. Our business plan was not to buy this, hold on, and flip.
Right.
We had a real business plan, and we had institutional partners ready to join us on that road, but we decided to get out of the way.
In terms of the structure of the original deal there, so it sounds like you had a large, well-known warehousing retail service provider that was going to take half the space. Was
Yeah.
that set up as a lease based on zoning? Was that set up as a
As a purchaser.
purchaser or a JV, or how did that work? A purchase based on
Yeah,
zoning approval?
So we own 30 acres of land, and the large retail warehouser was going to purchase. They are a company that doesn't typically like to lease. They own most of their property, so they were going to purchase outright from us 15 acres. And that worked for us because our site was just way too big at 30 acres.
Yeah.
We couldn't develop the whole 30 without somebody like them coming to the table.
Right.
So that's why we were in agreement to sell them half the land and then build out another piece. However, those plans changed once we got a really good offer on the table.
Mhm.
This is Sim. You and I were talking about this earlier, but Max, you must have a lot of relationships with the city councillors. Now this is getting very Toronto focused, but with Doug Ford going forward to reduce the number of city councillors, does that affect any of your business plans, or how do you think about that?
Well, actually not directly, because we have 7 projects on the go right now, and we don't actually have anything in the city of Toronto.
Okay, all right.
So obviously it's very important to get to know the city councillors, and I would say even more importantly the planning staff.
Yeah.
And as you may know, we used to have the OMB, the Ontario Municipal Board, to go to appeal decisions if the planning staff or the councillors were not in agreement with your development plans.
Right.
And that's now been replaced with the LPAT.
Right.
And we're just starting to see now what the effects of that are. But I would say that it's very important to work closely with planning staff and councillors. And how our business has changed is that when I tie up a property, I don't sit around and wait. Maybe perhaps in the past you would have. As soon as I tie up a property, I set up a meeting with the councillor and the planning staff right away.
Yeah.
And I have great planning consultants that we work with, and even on staff here at Nyx, we have a manager of development whose background is as a planner.
Yeah.
So immediately, we don't waste time. During due diligence, we sit down with the people who are going to be making these decisions to have a good understanding what the contentious issues are. And we tell them our vision of what we would like to do with the site and see if it's possible. And if we start getting negative feedback right away, we have to take into consideration. But if we get positive feedback, it's very likely that we move forward with the project. Even if we don't get the positive feedback that we like, but we think it's a good calculated risk, maybe we will even proceed with the project.
Right.
But more importantly than ever, it is essential to make and maintain good relationships with the planning staff,
Yeah.
the councillors, and the mayor when you can. So to answer your question directly though, in Toronto, unfortunately I don't have any projects in Toronto,
Yeah.
but my views on this would be not different. The planning staff are still there. So the
Right.
number of planning staff doesn't change,
Right.
right?
Just the actual councillors in each ward.
Correct. And the councillors are going to have more work. There's going to be less councillors to do more work. That being said, as a proactive developer, I don't care if it's 3 councillors, 20 councillors, or 100 councillors. It's important to try to get in front of the councillors when you can, keep those relationships, support them wherever possible, because when you need that favor to say, can I have a quick meeting, can I have a coffee, can we chat about things, it's so vital. Real estate is a relationship business, right? Whether it be with investors, whether it be with brokers, or planning staff and the government. You've got to maintain those relationships to be successful.
Just a question for you relating to the LPAT versus the OMB, especially given the fact that a lot of the projects that I've seen Nyx Capital do have been, call it pure development as opposed to development and construction. What is that change, if you don't mind explaining to our viewers, between that OMB model and the timelines that were approached back then and versus the LPAT model and timelines now? And how does that directly impact you as a developer?
I think as a developer, it doesn't change how we underwrite projects or how we look at risk of a project. There's always an element of risk when you're doing land development. That being said, I would say that we're much more cautious in terms of our approach from the early stages, where we said we could figure it out once we've purchased the property. We would not say that now. And in addition, it's vital to have the right pieces in place before we put forward a submission to the city. We do a lot more planning work with consultants, a lot of legal work with our lawyers upfront. So a lot of the costs that we would have to spend anyway are now front end loaded. So I would say that would probably be the biggest change, but the work itself doesn't change. If what you're trying to apply for makes rational sense from a planning perspective, and if the planners and counselors are supportive, you shouldn't have an issue.
Have you taken any Have you taken any projects through the local planning appeals tribunal?
Not yet. In fact, the first project being taken through in the province just happened yesterday.
Wow.
And so we had our planner attend, and turned out that it got pushed back to another day. So we haven't actually seen it in action yet, and we haven't experienced it yet. We hope that it will work well, and fortunately, the projects that we're working on, we do have the support of the counselors and the planning staff.
Right.
So hopefully it should be smooth, and we don't have to actually go that far. But it's a wait and see. I think everybody is going to sit back and just try to navigate this new environment. I think it's actually a good thing. It's a good change for the province in terms of allowing everybody to have their voice. However, the one thing it does introduce is more time and risk, which is not a great thing for developers and investors.
Right.
So we try to control the amount of time your project takes and the amount of money that we have to invest into projects. So it's a wait and see attitude. And once again, I think you need to be really selective as to the projects you take on. And what I think it means for the marketplace, though, is that projects that already have zoning, that already have their bylaws in place to develop what they wish to develop, are going to significantly increase in value.
Yeah.
Because this whole process has brought uncertainty to the process, right? Things should work out okay, but with extra uncertainty, it means that the projects that are approved are going to be worth more.
Yeah.
So when a lot of people think about private equity, they think about putting a capital investment into a company and maybe doing a management turnaround and taking that company public, right? So what are the different private equity models that you've seen as opposed to the alignment models, but actual private equity models in real estate? And what does Nyx Capital do exactly, and why do they call themselves a private equity player?
Right. As of right now, we don't have any pension fund investors. The majority, or actually all of our investors, are private, high net worth families or individuals. So where we differ from some other real estate investment companies is that we can take on private individuals who can invest in most cases, it's about $100,000 is the minimum investment, versus they may not be able to place that money in a real estate investment on their own to buy property, or they may not get access to some of the larger private equity companies or even institutional investment companies because they're only investing $100K. So we have investment vehicles that allow high net worth private individuals and families or companies to play in this private equity real estate space to make direct investments into real estate versus investing through a REIT or a mutual fund or a mortgage investment corporation. So that's the product that we offer to the marketplace, A. And then B, Because we are looking at deals that offer, I would say, better returns than typical income-producing real estate, we have investors who are willing to take on a little bit more risk and are looking to make 15, if not over 20% per year on the investments they make with us. The way we set it up is that we do, as of right now, we do all our deals on a project-by-project basis. So we set them up as limited partnerships.
Yeah.
Nyx Capital here, we act as the general partner. We're also co-investors in the deal, so we have the correct alignment as we talked before.
So you invested the limited partnership in that case? Okay.
Yeah, so the partners here at Nyx will invest anywhere from 15 up to, sometimes even up to 50%, depending on the scale of the deal, ourselves. So we manage the deal, but we're also always investors in our deals. And then we go out and pass the hat around amongst accredited investors who are looking for returns in commercial real estate and direct investments in real estate. So that's sort of how we differ a little bit. And I kind of touched on what a limited partnership is and why is that important to an investor. So limited partnership, we act as something called the general partner. We're the managers of the deal. But we can bring in investors as limited partners who have limited liability. So that means that if you invested $100,000 into a project with us, and for some reason, say it fell apart, something went really bad, and we lost everything, your liability would be limited only to that $100,000 that you put in.
Right.
So we take on more risk as the general partner because we're putting debt covenants on the line. We're also investing in the project. But you as a limited partner, you get the benefit of that real estate investment, but the maximum liability you have is what you put into the deal.
So you don't ever ask for guarantees from limited partners typically?
No.
Okay.
And that's a real selling feature for people potentially wanting to invest in real estate. Say, Sim, you and I went out and we want to buy a 4-plex together or 6-plex. We would have to probably put up our own personal covenant to get the mortgage. And then if, for example, we forgot to pay our insurance and there's a slip and fall, people could sue us personally if we decide to buy that in our personal name. Some people can get around this by, putting in a corporation. We can form a corp. And then we have limited liability, which is great. But under the form of a corporation, you have to pay corporate tax before you pay dividends to your shareholders. So why a limited partnership is so great is because it's also a flow-through vehicle. So you get the benefits of limited liability, but also $1 coming into the limited partnership doesn't get taxed because a limited partnership is not actually a person under the eyes of Revenue Canada. So that means $1 coming in, yes, there's some fees paid to the general partner, but that money flows straight through to the investors and it's untaxed.
No double taxation.
No double taxation.
Yeah.
So our investors love it because once they get the funds in, they know that it hasn't been taxed, and then based on their own personal position, it might be personally, it might be through a corporation, it might be through a family trust. They get to allocate those funds however they wish once it hits their bank account. So great thing about limited partnerships is that you have a limited liability and also you get the flow through benefits from a tax perspective. And as a private equity company, we create these vehicles for high net worths to invest alongside us.
Interesting. So Max, obviously a lot of people in our industry know you and you have a great reputation.
Thanks, Sam.
But just like myself, I have a few nicknames that some of my close colleagues call me, and I know that you have one. I believe it's Max the Axe.
Yeah, that's
So how did that nickname come about, Max?
great question, Sam. That nickname actually came about when I was an asset manager at GWL. I was managing a portfolio of both retail and industrial properties, and even though most of my portfolio was industrial, that was the first time I got exposed to retail tenants. And many times the retail tenants are in smaller units, so aside from the anchors, you've got local companies who are owned and run by local operators who, their livelihood is on the line. And sometimes those businesses work out and sometimes they don't. And as a commercial landlord, my fiduciary is always to maximize the revenue for my shareholders. In this case, it was a large pension plan here in Canada. And when people aren't paying the rent, the prudent thing to do is to understand why and either work it out with a tenant. And if you can't work it out, sometimes it's better to cut the cord. And I remember distinctly this one company. It was a rather large ethnic restaurant in one of our retail plazas, and months after months they kept short paying the rent. It got to the point where they were now 4 months behind on different payments and arrears. And you just can't let that go on for too long, because if they can't solve the problem, there's a good chance that it will never be solved. And so we decided to lock the doors. We gave them fair notice, locked the doors, and understandably the tenant came in, set an appointment to come see me, and they came in and they cried, and I had a box of tissues beside me, so it was okay. And I'm sympathetic that there are situations where a lot of money and time has been invested by these tenants. But also, at the end of the day, we're in the business of making money for our shareholders. And I said, I'm sorry. He was crying, but I had to leave him there and cut him loose. So as a younger asset manager in the firm, they saw the person crying in front of me, and I was kind of cold and ruthless, and cut him loose and said, Max, the axe. And that's how I got that nickname.
Yeah,
Awesome.
well, Max, you are one of the most sympathetic guys I know, and you've helped me a lot in my career, so I don't think you're as ruthless and cold as you say you were there, but no, as you said, sometimes it is better to cut the loose, and you have your own responsibilities and your own duties where sometimes they, for whatever reason, don't mesh with what other people want, but you do.
Yeah, real estate isn't always roses and chocolates. It's a tough business sometimes. We have to lock out tenants. We get into arguments with our partners. We are often in lawsuits. So yes, it's a great business, but it really keeps you on your toes. And you have to be smart and mindful of all the different situations that can arise, and ultimately just be flexible and adapt. And that's a great thing about this business. No day is the same as another.
In the next 5 years, how do you see private equity evolving?
Yeah, over the next 5 years, I think that there will continue to be space for private equity investors like us, just because as much as technology has evolved, I feel as if real estate is still a business where information is imperfect. And because information is imperfect, there are arbitrage opportunities. And why is it imperfect? Because there's so many people involved in this business, whether it be brokers with relationships, or owners with different incentives, or government rules being unclear or uncertain. And whenever there is that uncertainty and that control of information, there are opportunities to make money. And I think that although there are services like Altus, like CoStar, the Toronto Real Estate Board, all types of research coming out of CB, Colliers, JLL, Avis & Young, etc., that have made us a much more educated, both consumers, investors, and advisors. There's still opportunities because of imperfect information in the marketplace. So I think as private equity investors, there will continue to be lots of opportunities, A. And then B, I think that the really fortunate position that we're in is that we work in the GTA in Canada, which is the largest commercial real estate market here. And we are fortunate enough to have an influx of population, immigration to the city each and every year. And with that continued growth, there will continue to be real estate opportunities. So my outlook for the GTA specifically, that's where we invest, is good.
So do you base your investment philosophy on that sort of, that new coming immigration or infrastructure? Because I remember I was reading a report last week that there's about 190 billion of infrastructure projects that the government of Canada is going to be actually investing in for the next 10 years, not including the private capital money that would go into that, but just public money. So when you're looking at projects, what are you looking at? Transit? What other aspects are you looking at when you're trying to figure out how does this fit into the whole marketplace?
In general, I think that what we look for is, like I said, we play up on that risk curve, right? And by playing up on that risk curve, something that we typically look at is just the demand for whatever product it is that we're trying to do. So currently we play in the industrial space, we play in the multi-residential development space, as well as we play in the self-storage space, which is a new business segment for us. With continued population growth, that certainly helps. But we take it much more, we take a much more granular look, because we actually go down to the location itself and try to figure out what is the highest and best use for the property. So although we absolutely need to take macroeconomics into consideration, because I'm not doing $100 million deals at a time, and we're doing multi-million dollar deals, we have to look at each project on its own merits, on its own basis, to figure out whether or not that specific project makes sense, right? And how we can add value to it.
So Max, obviously I know yourself, I know your family, I know your kids. How do you balance that approach of being Max, the hardworking chief investment officer, but also being Max, the dad? And what is your sort of typical day-to-day like in that approach?
Yeah, well, fortunately, I have a great support system at my home, and to allow me to do the things that I do. I do work long hours, but I don't really see it as working because it's so much fun, and I work with colleagues who are friends of mine. So that, for me, I think, is the most important thing. Your work can't really feel like work. Because once it starts to feel like work, life's too short, and you should look at other opportunities. How do I balance it on a day-to-day basis? Wake up in the morning, take the kids to school, off to work. So it's no different than most other people.
You're an early riser though, Max, from what I remember working with you in the past.
Yeah, which is great. And I guess as a principal of a company, I never really turn it off. If something comes up early in the morning or late at night, I'm typically available to take care of the things that I need to. And with technology, it makes it so easy. Even I was recently in Asia for about 2.5 weeks, and it was very easy to stay connected with everything we needed to do. So not too big an issue.
As someone that's either young in the industry or looking to get in the industry, what are some success pointers you could point for them, as well as for people that are looking to sort of take that next step and get to try to become a chief investment officer?
I would say there's a couple things I would think about. So my advice to somebody, say first somebody wanting to get into the industry, right? I think that as somebody fresh out of school, or maybe a couple of years out of school, looking to get into real estate, first you've got to decide, is real estate where you want to be? Or is something that you're passionate about? Because it just doesn't make sense if you're not passionate about it. But say you're passionate about it, I would say early on, probably I'm going to recommend sort of 2 or 3 places to go. You want to get as broad a brush of the industry as possible. And I think that some really good places to do that would be A, in brokerage, B, in the appraisal side, or C, barring one of those first 2 options, anywhere where you can get some sort of client-facing experience, right? Because the technical skills, they will come, right? They will come, and they can come through hard work. However, getting a broad brush of the industry, understanding from a bird's eye view what the real estate industry looks like, is very hard to do when you're pigeonholed into a specific role within the real estate industry. Not only that, as a young person, it would be nice early on if you could see what those opportunities are. So, people say, don't miss the forest for the trees. And that's what I would say is, for a first job anyway, I would actually push people towards a larger company where there's great systems that can be understood, and there's good people to mentor you. as well as a wide range of roles and jobs that you can look at and understand. So young person, try to put yourself in a position where you're client facing,
Yeah.
as well as be within a larger organization if possible, so that you just take into your own toolbox all the different best practices from an organization. And then go into private equity like me sometime in the future.
Yeah. And that speaks to what you were talking about earlier, and just mentorship with Jim Murray, for example. That was the gentleman.
For me,
and I can even just move on one step forward. So say you're now a journeyman.
Yeah.
You've been in the business 3
Yeah.
years, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years now. Now what do? I would say that it's the technical skills you have to sort of build up in your first couple of years, right?
Yeah.
You kind of figure out what you want to do. But then the soft skills, which aren't necessarily taught in school, getting out there, networking, making friends. I would say that the longer you are in the business, the more relationships matter, and the soft skills matter. So don't always get caught up on all the deadlines and the work and forgetting about your friends in the industry and people who can help you out and mentors. Because I would say that half of your success in this industry will depend upon others. Real estate, as I said before, is an industry where there's imperfect information. And without friends, you're not going to get perfect information. You're not even going to get close. You need to rely on others and work with others to be successful.
This is the final question. It's called the 3 truths. So if you imagine years from now, you lived a long, very successful life, and your kids and your wife and everybody's happy, and so proud of you for all the things that you accomplished. It was a wonderful life. You lived to be 150, and now it's your final day, and for some reason, everything that you've put out, including the many best-selling novels that you've written, including this interview, it's all being erased, and you're able to make 3 notes to pass on as lessons to your family, to young business people, to just people in general. What would you put on those three notes?
Wow, that's a great question. I think that you've got to kind of like strip it all back to, what's most important to you as a person and what it is that you value, right? I think that the truth for me, I think the most important thing in my life would probably be my family and my friends, without a doubt. Doesn't matter how much money you make in your career, you can't take it with you once you pass away at some time in the future, right? And so make time for your family and your friends, right? We're all busy in our work career, absolutely, but there are some things that are more important. So that's first truth, is focus on friends and family. Second, something that I've only recently, not recently, but within the last 5 years, really come to understand is that time is worth more than money.
Yeah.
So the time that we have to do what we do is worth more than perhaps the money that we have to spend sometimes. So sometimes if you're faced with an opportunity to either spend money to do something or to save time, the time you can't get back. Right? So time is now, at this point in my career, is worth more than money.
Right.
And so spend your time wisely, right? Spend it, invest your time into things that will help you to grow or to make you more successful or to be able to cultivate your relationships with your friends and your family.
Right.
And then I guess a third one is tough.
Yeah, it is.
Another truth that I think is also very important is you need to be happy. Right? I know it sounds very generic, but what I mean is that when you wake up in the morning and you go to brush your teeth and you look at yourself in the mirror, right? And you think about and you reflect upon what you're about to do in the day ahead. or the weeks ahead, or the months ahead.
Yeah.
And you ask yourself, am I truly happy doing what I'm doing?
Right.
And this sort of also ties back into the time thing, right? If you wake up one day and you look at yourself and you say, I'm not truly happy doing what I'm doing, don't wait. Don't let it drag on. Don't get into this rut where you're comfortable or you're doing it because of other obligations. You have the power to make that change, and you should, because I've already said time is so valuable, but you need to be happy doing what you do.
Yeah.
Life is short, so you should enjoy the time that we have working and also being with family and friends. So always have that gut check on a daily basis, a weekly basis, to have that sort of reflection, say, am I truly happy doing what I'm doing? And if the answer is ever no,
change it.
Make
Do
that
something
change.
about
Yeah, don't be afraid to make that change.
Yeah. This is a really good point. I think it's so easy to get stuck in a pattern too. So it can be challenging to do that. But if you take the time to reflect, then perhaps
we all get comfortable, but have that gut check.
Yeah. Before we sign off, is there anything that you want people to be aware of, or anything that you think people should be looking into, whether it's something that Nyx is doing, something that you're working on more in your personal life?
Yeah, I think that just in general, I'll kind of wrap it up from a sort of a company perspective. I've had the great opportunity and experience of working with some of the largest real estate companies in Canada, working for some of and advising pension plans and large institutional investors, which gave me the tools I needed to eventually reach where I am now, where as a principal of a private equity company, I can use those skills and experience to work on my own projects. Not everybody is going to follow this path, but for those who do and want to do something like that, don't be afraid, right? Take the time, put those tools in your arsenal, and once the time hits where you say, I'd love to be doing this on my own versus for these pension plans or these portfolio managers, and I'd love to do these projects on your own, don't be afraid. Seek guidance from others who've done it before. And it's a great opportunity. There's great reward if you seek it out. But get the experience, and then there's huge opportunities in this real estate industry and as a career. So very fortunate to be blessed with a great team and career in commercial real estate. And I encourage all young people who are considering it to continue at it. It's a great place to be.
Okay. Well, I thank you everyone for tuning in, listening along, or watching along, whatever medium you're listening to this on. Thank you very much for your time, and we really appreciate you being here with us.
Sim and Dima, thank you very much for your time and for inviting me on. It was great.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Cool.
Thanks, guys.